and gentlemen, and a really very warm welcome to you all. It's fantastic to have you here. My name is Fiona Griffith from ISLE.
And I'm Piers Clark, and I'm the chairman of ISLE. And we're both here today. We're going to help moderate this excellent conference.
Really, it's a great pleasure to be in this beautiful city and to have this fantastic venue for today's conference. We've got a great agenda, a busy agenda. Piers and I will be helping everyone to stick to time during their presentations. And really the most important thing about today is that we're here to have fun. So please enjoy yourselves and please embrace everything that we have lined up for you. Just before we kick off the formal proceedings, I've got a couple of housekeeping things that I would like to talk through. First of all, just to be clear, we're not expecting any fire alarm today. So if there is an alarm, I would ask that we all leave the building as quickly as possible. The exit points out of the auditorium are at the back, where many of you came in, at the side exits just below the stage, and there's also 2 further exits behind the stage. So please leave as quickly as possible, should that happen. One other thing just to make you all aware of is that we are using Slido to help facilitate today, to gather all your thoughts and opinions. It's going to be, there'll be questions that we'll be asking and asking your feedback for, and also there will be the possibility for you to submit questions through this Slido app. So whilst we have this, I would just like you to all take the opportunity to log into Slido. So go to the website, which is sli.do, or you can also scan, you can use the camera on your phone to scan the barcode, and that will take you straight to the event. So if I could just ask you all to do that now, and then we'll be ready to get going later on. And whilst you're on your phones, if you could also turn them to silent so that we don't have any interruption to speakers during the day. Thank you.
So in a few minutes' time, we're going to actually test out Slido. We're going to have a few questions up there. So if you haven't got Slido set up on your phone, please do it right now. But just before we get to that, I'd like to share some context for today. So 30 years ago, I was in my final year at university, and I was studying for environmental sciences. And in the late 1980s, environmental sciences was a relatively new thing, but I was an angst-ridden student. And the things that worried me, there were 2 things, and anyone who's sort of 50 plus will remember them, that we were worried about whales, we were worried about the hunting of whales, and we were worried about the depletion of the ozone layer. And I like to think that in the last 30 years, those 2 environmental issues, which felt crushingly difficult to deal with back in 1989, we've dealt with, essentially. And today, as we stand facing climate crisis and facing some of the challenges, I hope that we can look forward with the same sense of hope that led us to being able to address those issues from 30 years ago. Because the great thing about human beings is that when the right minds get together and when we apply ourselves, we are able to address the challenges that face us. And so today's conference is really about 3 things. It's about raising awareness, it's about taking stock, and it's about promoting. So it's about raising awareness of the need for us to be urgent in our thinking around water management practices. It's about taking stock of some of the policy changes that have been made and some of the recommendations that are out there and some of the results that have been generated from research. And then it's about promoting an exchange of best practice. It's about promoting the exchange of good innovation. And we're here in this great city because actually the city of Aragon won a pan-European competition to host this conference, the 5th EIP conference. And it was one we're here on the banks of a beautiful river in a city where water is vital to the national infrastructure, and that this city has a proud history and tradition of doing marvelous things, not just with civil and entrepreneurial and institutional rights around water. So I hope that today we're going to learn a lot And if we can pull up the agenda, you can see, I know there's a lot of detail there, and you'll be able to see the agenda through the Slido app. You'll be able to see the program of today. We've basically got the day split into 4 sections. So the first section, after we've done the keynote opening speeches, is around the preparedness. What's our preparedness for water-related challenges? After that, after lunch, we've then got the private sector coming to talk to us and share some case studies around things that the private sector is doing. Then we move to the third session, which is looking at what are the opportunities for innovation. And finally, we come to the last session, which is on lessons learned. What can we take away that we can build upon for the future? So that's the plan for today. I'd like to remind you that there are a number of side events. We had a lot of side events yesterday, and we've got in particular a very exciting side event tomorrow on pharmaceuticals and their impact on the water ecosystem. If you haven't signed up for that, please do so. It's sponsored by the World Health Organization and the World Bank and a number of other organizations, and it's tomorrow between 9:30 and 12:30, and you can register for that outside. Before I pass back to Fiona, I think the one last thing to say is that not only do we have the 500 plus people here in the room, but this conference is also being live streamed, and we will have feedback via Twitter throughout the day from an audience which is much bigger than those of us who are just here privileged enough to be in Zaragoza. Fiona, over to you.
Right, thank you, Piers. So I'm going to bring everyone back to Slido. So if you could just make sure you're logged on. We've got a few questions we would like to ask you all, really just to make sure that you're all awake and to really touch on some important themes and points that we want to take forward through the day to gather some opinions and set the tone for what is ahead. And also, I guess, through these questions, it's an important part for the speakers to take note, because you might want to pick up some of the feedback that has been captured from the rest of the audience through these questions. So if everyone is ready with their phones, the first question that we have, which will just be uploading, and it will also come onto your phones. Oh, okay, fine. So how resilient is the EU's water management? So if you can all cast your opinions, that would be fantastic.
So I like this question because it's specifically around how resilient is the EU's water management. And it makes me think, I wonder if they think about this issue when they're in the Asia Pacific or in North America or South America. It's a very interesting.
Absolutely. And I think actually there's many other parts of the world will really look to the EU to be leading the way and setting an example for water management and what action we're taking and how we can move things forward.
So we've had 104 responses there, and it looks like we've got it looks like we're not bad, but we're not brilliant, is what I take from that. A solid B+. Feels like a B+.
I'd say a B.
Shall we move to the second question?
Okay, so our second question for you all is, by when will the EU achieve good water status and zero pollution? By when will the EU achieve good water status and zero pollution? Your votes in, please.
So this question takes me back to that 30 years ago, and I wonder, a generation ago, did people even think about how long it would take to get to a zero pollution status?
Yes, I'm not sure my grandparents ever thought there was an issue and that we would today be met here talking about some of these huge challenges that lie ahead.
Well, now that is very interesting. We've got almost half the audience thinking that we are never going to get to that goal. I'm sure the feeling is that we should always be striving for it, but that it'll always be a goal that's maybe just outside our reach.
Well, I think that sets
an important
essential that we're all here. We've got some work to do if this is the case. Okay. Can we please move to the final question? So how much does research and innovation contribute to achieving the EU's water conservation targets? So your votes in, please, for this as well.
So on the basis of the fact that most of the audience think we're never going to get there, I suppose maybe on innovation, innovation is a journey you never quite complete. There's always something more that we can reach out for. There's always another step of invention and improvement that we can get to. And yes, this is looking interesting. So there's the great majority of people in the room seem to feel that innovation is a crucial part of contributing to the journey of zero pollution.
Well, that's good for
That's
today.
good.
Excellent. We're going to have, as I said, a good, fun day. Excellent. Thank you.
So, with that, we'd like to now move to our first opening speakers. Fiona, would you like to welcome them up?
Yes, so could I please welcome to the stage our first speakers. So I'd like to invite Mr. President of the Government of Aragon, Javier Lamban, and I would also like to invite Manuel Menendez, who's the Director General of Water at the Ministry for Ecological Transition. Gentlemen, welcome to the stage.
If you go to the lectern.
Mr. President, if you'd like to come and speak from the lectern here.
He's going to speak in Spanish.
That's okay. Yeah.
Señor alcalde de la ciudad de Zaragoza, ciudad anfitriona de este gran acontecimiento, delegada del Gobierno de España en Aragón, consejero del Gobierno, director general de Medio Ambiente de la Comisión Europea, director general del Agua del Gobierno de España, representantes de las Cortes de Aragón, directores generales, queridas amigas, queridos amigos. En primer lugar, sean todos ustedes bienvenidos a Aragón, tierra acogedora por naturaleza y muy preocupada siempre desde su más remota historia por todo lo relacionado con el agua. Cualquier decisión de la Comisión Europea que pasara por la elección de Zaragoza o de cualquier otra ciudad aragonesa para la celebración de eventos sería bien recibida y merecería nuestra gratitud. Pero si esa decisión tiene que ver con algo relacionado con el agua, esa gratitud y ese reconocimiento es mayor. Están ustedes en un pabellón, en un palacio de congresos que formó parte del recinto de la Expo del año 2008, de la Exposición Internacional del año 2008, celebrada en Zaragoza, con un lema que es suficientemente explícito: agua y desarrollo sostenible. Se cumplió el año pasado el 10º aniversario y lo celebramos con un espíritu claro, el de retomar, el de reanudar las dinámicas iniciadas entonces, el de retomar aquel legado de la Expo desde muchos puntos de vista, pero fundamentalmente desde el punto de vista del agua y del desarrollo sostenible. Y presentamos, con motivo de ese 10º aniversario, presentamos un proyecto al que denominamos Ebro 2030, evidentemente en relación con la Agenda 2030 y sus 17 Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible, que incluía 3 vectores fundamentales, todos ellos relacionados con esos objetivos y creo, adivino, perfectamente alineados con la estrategia de crecimiento Green Deal que ayer mismo aprobó la Comisión Europea. Hablábamos de que el río Ebro se convirtiera en el corredor verde más importante de España, con una actuación ambiciosa en sus riberas, con una actuación ambiciosa para eliminar los riesgos de las avenidas que periódicamente se producen, con una actuación ambiciosa, en definitiva, para hacer del río no una amenaza, sino una oportunidad de crecimiento, de desarrollo económico, de ocio, aunque rigurosamente atenido a criterios de sostenibilidad. Hablábamos también de convertir el antiguo recinto de la Expo en un espacio de innovación. Lo llamamos Expo Innova y tratamos de que la nueva economía, tratamos de que la movilidad del siglo XXI que deje atrás los combustibles fósiles, de que la digitalización, de que en definitiva los nuevos parámetros de la economía tuvieran acogida en centros específicos aquí localizados. Un proyecto que ya va bastante bien encaminado en lo que se refiere a la movilidad y en lo que se refiere a la digitalización. Y finalmente, en línea con ese objetivo de recuperar para Zaragoza su condición de capital referencial en lo que a la gestión del agua se refiere, hablábamos de que nuestra ciudad se convirtiera en sede de grandes eventos internacionales en relación con el agua. Por eso ha sido tan importante la decisión de la Comisión Europea de elegir a Zaragoza para celebrar esta conferencia europea de agua e innovación que con tanto éxito y de manera tan brillante están ustedes celebrando ayer y hoy mismo. Para nosotros, queridos amigos, el agua es un elemento fundamental. Lo es para cualquier espacio, para cualquier sociedad, para cualquier país del mundo, pero nosotros, por razones de escasez consustancial con nuestra propia naturaleza, lo ha sido siempre. Y hemos tenido la vocación de ser innovadores en su gestión. Ahora mismo, desde el Gobierno de Aragón, se lidera una red interterritorial de territorios inteligentes en la gestión del agua que trata de aplicar todas las ventajas de lo digital a la gestión de este importantísimo recurso que esperamos que surta efectos de entrada para la previsión y la gestión de las avenidas del Ebro, pero también para cualquier otro elemento relacionado con esta cuestión. Estamos desarrollando iniciativas, estamos desarrollando técnicas para corregir un problema grave de contaminación de un río, del río Gállego, por un problema de lindano que se suscitó hace ya algunos años. Estamos, en definitiva, tratando de ser innovadores en esta materia, en la gestión del agua, y por eso nos interesa tanto esta conferencia, a la que algo podremos aportar, pero sobre todo de la que tanto podemos aprender. Por eso es por lo que, como presidente del Gobierno de Aragón, estoy muy feliz de que estén hoy aquí todos ustedes con nosotros. Esperamos mucho de esta conferencia. Y, desde luego, querido director general de Medio Ambiente de la Comisión Europea, para cualquier circunstancia, para cualquier iniciativa, para cualquier acontecimiento relacionado con esta materia que ustedes quieran organizar y que necesiten un lugar donde vayan a ser bien entendidos, bien acogidos y cuyas enseñanzas vayan a ser especialmente provechosas, piensen ustedes siempre en Aragón, piensen ustedes siempre en la ciudad de Zaragoza. Muchas gracias.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Manuel Menendez. I'm the Water Director of the Ministry for Ecological Transition. And let me say firstly, thank you. Thank you to the European Commission. Thank you to the Government of Aragon for hosting this conference and for allowing me to be part of this opening session. For sure you know that water management in Spain is not an easy task. We have to fulfill all the environmental objectives in our water bodies, but at the same time we have to be sure of maintaining a guarantee for water supply for, of course, for urban population, but also for energy and also for irrigation. In fact, irrigation is the most water-demanding area in Spain. It's more than 3/4 of the water demands are for irrigation. And also in Spain, we have some areas, especially in the Mediterranean coast, that are prone to floods, to droughts. Well, sorry for that. I usually make a personal joke, and I say that in Spain, not only we have water stress situations, we have a water director in permanent stress situations. So this is something that the people that is working with water in Spain, I think that we are more or less in the same situation. But all these difficult tasks are also more challenging now because due to the climate change. Climate change is introducing new vulnerabilities in the water system, is something that has to be taken into account just to for us to change our minds, to change the usual way in which we are facing the water issues. Believe me that regarding climate change, usual business is maybe a risky business. I mean, usual business regarding climate change could be not an option. This is something that we are discussing now in the COP25 in Madrid. We are having a lot of opportunities to talk about climate change and to talk about water, because water is relevant, a very important issue, a very key element in climate change. In my opinion, in a similar way that energy is the most relevant factor for mitigation regarding climate change, water is the most relevant factor, the most relevant component regarding adaptation. And this is something that for sure is going to be present in the discussions, in the presentation of the sessions of today. So let me say congratulations for organizing this conference, and thank you very much for allowing us to participate in it. Thank you, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you to both Mr. President and the Director General for your introductions and welcome. And there's a photograph, I think, to be taken before you can return to your seats. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So please we now are going into a couple of keynote talks. Our first keynote is being delivered by Daniel Cajeja from the European Commission, and he's going to provide us with some key messages around the future of the European Union's water policies and management. So if I could invite Daniel to the stage, please. Welcome. You need this for your slides. And can I just ask for the technicians at the back? Perfect. We've got the slides back. Lovely. So over to you.
Muy buenos días a todos. En primer lugar, quisiera agradecer al presidente de Aragón su invitación y su excelente acogida para organizar este congreso, al Gobierno de España y a todos cuantos han participado en esta organización. Organizar un evento tan importante no es fácil y la Comisión Europea está muy satisfecha. I am delighted to be with you today, and after thanking the authorities of Aragon for their excellent organization and for the good work, I would like to share with you some of the situations, some of the challenges that we have ahead of us. And I would like to say that this meeting could not take place at a more timely moment. We have the COP25 discussions in Madrid. I will have to go this afternoon for the final run of this negotiation. We have this water conference at the same time, and only yesterday the European Commission was adopting its Green Deal, the strategy for Europe, the strategy that we propose to face some of the challenges that we have. So I would like today to share with you this situation, and then I will go more in depth into water issues. And the point of departure is that we are facing major planetary crises. In fact, we have 4 big crises ahead of us. First of all, we have a huge demographic challenge. We will be 9.5 billion people in the planet by 2050. We will go from a big planet with very few people to a crowded planet where there will be less and less resources. Every year, 140 million people are joining the middle classes, mainly in the emerging economies in China, and this is putting pressure on natural resources. These people legitimately want to do better, but this is putting more and more pressure on their resources. By 2050, 70% of the world's population will be living in cities, 50% of which have not yet been built. And if you want a figure which is very, very striking, between 2001 and 2010, China has consumed more cement than the United States during the 20th century. We have never seen such a pressure on resources. One planet will not be enough. We will need, if we continue this trend, 1.6 planets to survive on Earth. Plastics are causing major pollution problems. 85% of litter on European beaches comes from plastics. And half of it is single-use plastics, which are only used for a short time before they are discarded. We say that a plastic bag takes 5 seconds to be produced, 5 minutes to consume, and 5 centuries to eliminate. We have been doing very stupid things. How can you produce objects which have a single use and which in a material that lasts forever? We need to change all this. But this is not the only challenge we have. 60% of the world ecosystems are degraded, and we are facing a major biodiversity crisis. Humanity has wiped out 60% of mammals, birds, fish and reptiles since 1970. And of the 8 million species that we have inventoried, 1 million of them are in danger right now. Climate change is a reality. Climate change is there, and climate change and biodiversity are the 2 sides of the same coin. So we should not be surprised when you see young people demonstrating in the streets, because the next generation are saying, in which condition are you going to leave the planet for us? They are going out in the streets and saying, we are tired of words, we need now action. We need now decisions. And we see in COP25 the importance of the decisions that we have to take if we have to change the situation. We have seen all these things happening, but we have never seen before is the acceleration. And acceleration needs urgent decisions. We are running out of time. It is not only young people. If you look at the Davos World Economic Forum, every year they do the inventory of the top 10 global risks. And this is something done by the business community, by the most important companies in the world. Well, the 3 top risks for the business community have nothing to do with trade wars, with cybersecurity of the economic crisis. The 3 top risks are extreme weather events, failure of climate change measures, and natural disasters. And right at the top, among the 5, you have water crisis, hydric crisis, identified by business as one of the most important challenges we have ahead of us. And if you ask Europeans, what do they think? These are the results of the Eurobarometer. 95% of EU citizens say protecting the environment has to be the priority. And 9 out of 10 are saying climate change is a very serious problem. 72% say the EU should do more. Yes, you are doing things, but we want more environmental European standards. We want more European leadership in order to solve these issues. So, I have not come here to share all the gloom and doom. I come now to the positive part of the intervention. Yes, there are problems. Yes, we have never faced these challenges. But yes, there are also solutions. Solutions exist. We can fix the issues if we act. And this is what the European Commission adopted yesterday. And this is why this is a unique opportunity to share with you the European Green Deal proposal. President von der Leyen said, I will propose a European Green Deal in my first 100 days in office. Well, she proposed it in her first 11 days in office, because yesterday was her 11th day in the job. She will, in the coming years, concentrate on 6 things. In Europe, we cannot do so many things. We have to concentrate on the essential. We want to put in place a European Green Deal. We need an economy that works for people. We need a Europe fit for the digital age. We need to protect or to promote our European way of life, a stronger Europe in the world, and a new push for European democracy, making Europe more understandable, more democratic, more close to our citizens. This is the organization of the European Commission. This slide is to tell you with whom you have to speak in the coming years, but you will see that in charge of the Green Deal we have Vice President Frans Timmermans, who will coordinate the work of 6 commissioners: environment and oceans, agriculture, energy, transport and health, to deliver the Green Deal. Commissioner Sinkevicius will be in charge of the environment on water issues and ocean matters. He would have liked to be with you today, but due to his responsibilities in the Commission, he has told me that he will meet you in the next opportunity. He has already met many of you, but he will continue in the coming years to be your interlocutor for water issues. The youngest commissioner in the European Commission, the first ever commissioner to be born after the fall of the Berlin Wall, and this shows also his commitment to the challenges that young people are raising to us. So what is the European Green Deal about? It is about 3 things. We want Europe to be the first climate neutral continent in the world. We want to secure the financing to make this transition to decarbonization a reality. And we have a 3rd challenge, which is to preserve Europe's environment. And of course, we do all this in the framework of the SDGs, because within the SDGs, you have responsible consumption and production, the circular economy, life on land, clean water, life below water, and good health and well-being. All these SDGs, this 2030 agenda, to which President Lamban was referring, is at the heart of the European Green Deal. And I would like to say that we will be, in the context of climate, the first climate neutral continent in the world. This is what it is about, decarbonizing Europe from here till 2050 and reducing emissions 50% to try to reach 55%. We will extend the emission trading scheme, a carbon border tax, a European climate pact to which we want to associate regions, cities, young people, social, economic stakeholders, and a revision of the Energy Taxation Directive. All this has to go in the direction to have a strong climate policy to fight climate change. Second, we need sustainable investment. The Green Finance Strategy, the Just Transition Fund, the Sustainable Europe Investment Plan, all these will be important issues. We want to mobilize 1 trillion investment over the next decade, and the EIB has to be the first European climate bank in order to ensure that we can mobilize the financing to secure this transition. But we need, and this is very important, to preserve Europe's environment. And for that, Europe will lead the biodiversity crisis. We need to have a global ambition next year for the CBD conference in China, with a global target, with national commitments, with funding, and with monitoring mechanisms. But we also need to look at the key areas affecting biodiversity loss. And you will see that in these areas there will be also an initiative. We have scheduled it for the month of February next year, and water will be also one of the key elements in the biodiversity strategy, because we need water to preserve biodiversity on the planet. We will also put in place, and this is also directly related to water, a farm-to-fork strategy, a vision for a sustainable food system to provide Europeans with nutritious, affordable and safe food. Current food and land use systems cause up to 30% of total greenhouse gas emissions. I don't need to say this in Aragon, a city which is very, very conscious and very much aware, a region which is very much affected by water issues. The farm-to-fork strategy is about sustainability in all the elements of the value chain. And there will be, yes, a new circular economy action plan. Circular economy is key. The water sector plays a key role, and we will work in the circular economy, tackling all the phases of the cycle, prioritizing sectors, involving industry, and harnessing the opportunities of digital technologies. Yes, the water sector has to be leading circularity, because we need to move away from this linear model, produce, consume, and throw away, and introduce circularity across all phases of the cycle. Last but not least, we want to put in place a zero pollution ambition. And the zero pollution ambition cannot work if the quality of the water we drink is not at its purpose, if we do not work on air quality, on hazardous chemicals and industrial emissions. So we will need to strengthen the legislative framework. We will need to enforce and implement better innovation, and this conference is about innovation, supporting member states and accelerating behavioral change from our citizens. Now, water and climate are at the center of the 4 key initiatives. We will not be the first climate-neutral continent if we do not actively work in water. The zero pollution ambition is indispensable in order to attain it, to have action on clean air and on clean water, and there will be a clean water action plan. We will need to integrate rivers, lakes, and seas to deliver the biodiversity strategy. And as I was saying, the new circular economy action plan will focus on water. And in this conference, this is about the future, but it is also about assessing where Europe's situation is. And I have to say that thanks to the Water Framework Directive, water quality deterioration has halted in Europe, but we need still a lot to do to help the 130,000 water bodies of Europe to keep the water in good status. You know, 2027 is the final deadline, and some 60% of these water bodies are still below good status. So there's a huge work ahead of us in the next 7 years. And according to the latest report of the European Environmental Agency, there is the picture. We have lights and shadows. Yes, the trend of pollutants in rivers and groundwater has gone down since 2010. Yes, water abstraction has decreased, but there are pressures dealing with chemicals, with agriculture, pharmaceuticals, microplastics, and climate change. Yes, citizens have access to basic sanitation, the vast majority, and more than 80% of the population is connected to secondary water treatment. Yes, bathing water is excellent for 82% of inland waters, but we need to work more on the coastal areas. Only 58% of the waters are in good status, and we will not reach the 2030 objectives if we do not address climate change, diffuse pollution, overexploitation, and biodiversity. In other words, business as usual is not acceptable. We need to do more in implementation, in infrastructure, we need to do more in innovation, and we need to do more on investment. And the 2027 final deadline is critical. In terms of legislation, we are very pleased with the fitness checks that we have completed on the Water Framework Directive. Here you see the situation of the surface water bodies below good status, which is the red. This is the information from the European Environmental Agency and the work ahead of us, all the red points that need to be addressed. And as I was saying, the Commission will be more focused than ever on environment and climate change. Sustainable water management will be crucial, and we will need to look at the sources of pollution, at the different uses of water, and at the sustainable water management framework. The fitness checks I was mentioning have been completed. We have announced them for the Water Framework Directive, also the Urban Wastewater Directive, and yes, the conclusion is implementation needs to accelerate. And in relation to the urban wastewater treatment, we face climate change, emerging pollutants, pharmaceuticals and microplastics are a problem for EU water bodies. This is why for pharmaceuticals we have launched the strategic approach to pharmaceuticals in the environment. We need also to do more in terms of investment. I will come back to this. But the good news is that Europe will have the first ever EU water regulation on water reuse. We have an agreement, and we hope before the end of the year to agree the revision of the Drinking Water Directive. The first ever water reuse regulation will give us a framework for the first time at European level to promote water reuse. We are wasting 95% of water, and there's a lot that has to be done with common European standards. And the Drinking Water Directive will, for the first time, introduce elements like access to water, more transparency, address the new pollutants, some endocrine disruptors, risk management provisions, and we are very close for a final agreement, which we hope with the Parliament and with the Council next week. Now, what is the future of water policy? And I am coming to the end of my presentation, so you can be relieved. There are three I's which are crucial. First of all, the I of implementation. Implementation needs to be accomplished. By 2027, we need to meet the objectives of the legislation. The Commission will continue exercising its role to enforce EU water legislation. Zero tolerance if we do not achieve. We will be stepping up pressure on the Member States to develop this. The second I is the I of investment. Underfinance is one of the reasons for the implementation gap. The OECD says we need 289 billion to be invested only for water supply and sanitation until 2030. 289 billion euros. And after having evaluated the Urban Wastewater Directive, there are 18 billion of capital and operation costs per year in the EU, whilst we could have benefits of 27.6 billion at current implementation level. So there's a lot of mobilization of finance, but there are also a lot of positive developments if we act now. And there is also an issue of avoiding costs. Thanks to preserving quality and quantity of water, we could have 500 million euros of avoided costs per year if we were just to reduce the pollution of pesticides. But we need to implement the cost recovery, Article 9 of the directive, the polluter pays, and adequate contribution by different water users. And the last I is innovation. We will not succeed without innovation. Lack of innovation is one of the hurdles. The water sector is very fragmented, and the European Innovation Partnership for Water, which exists since 2012, is the way forward. We need to associate all actors in the water sector. We need to work together. We need to create an active network to promote innovative technologies and innovative policies. So, in conclusion, this is my last slide, we believe that water has to be, is at the center of the new European Green Deal. It is essential for our future on the planet. Without water, there's no life. So water will be the top priority within the European Green Deal. We need to involve citizens further, and we think that the Green Deal is also a way to associate European citizens, and in particular, young people, to the European project. It is a huge opportunity for the economy. It is a huge opportunity for all of you, for all of us, in order to develop the water policies of the future. It has a very strong social dimension. This transition to the green economy has to be done in a just manner, and we will have to mobilize accompanying measures. And of course, we should never underestimate the global dimension. And I'm very glad that UNEP is participating, because water issues are global issues and we need global solutions. I would like to conclude with a final message. We can draw a lot of inspiration from water. Why? Because water cuts through hard rocks. Water permeates across. Water is patient, and water is persistent, and nothing can resist to water. So, let's look forward to the challenges, let's be patient and persistent, and let us succeed together in facing the challenges of the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for that excellent first keynote. If I'd like, Susan Gartner, I'd like to invite you up to take for the second of our two keynote presentations. The floor is all yours.
Thank you. It's an honor to have this opportunity to speak with you today and to initiate this important conversation talking about the global perspective. The UN Environment Program serves as a custodian agency for SDG 6 on clean water and sanitation. As many of you are probably aware, the world is currently not on track to achieve the global SDG targets by 2030. And we know that achieving SDG 6 is essential for progress on all of the other SDGs. Sustainable management of water underpins the wider efforts to end poverty, to advance sustainable development, to sustain peace and security. And as the title of this presentation implies, I'll be sharing some alarming information about the global state of progress on SDG 6. In order to really emphasize the true urgency of this situation and the importance of the discussions you're going to be having in this conference. But I also hope to leave you with a message of hope and share some examples of approaches that have really tremendous promise. Like some of you, I just came from Madrid at the Conference of Parties of the UNFCCC. And the Secretary General's opening remarks last week, he reminded us that climate-related natural disasters are becoming more frequent, more deadly, and more destructive, with growing human and financial costs. Drought in some parts of the world is progressing at alarming rates and destroying human habitats and endangering food security. However, he also said, "My message here today is one of hope, not despair." He said the scientific community is telling us that the roadmap to stay below 1.5 degrees is still within reach. But, he said, our war against nature must stop. And we know that that is possible. So in my presentation today, I hope to leave you with three main messages. The first is that achieving the SDGs requires an integrated and transformational approach. Second is that our choices as individuals matter. And third is that nature is part of the solution. I'll start by telling you a little bit about the work of UNEP. UNEP works at the science policy interface, and the foundation of our work are the most recent scientific evidence, such as that provided by the Global Environmental Outlook reports. Now, the most recent report, the GEO6, tells us that the global water cycle reflects the impacts of pollution growth, or population growth, agriculture, economic development, urbanization, industrialization, deforestation, and, yes, climate change. All of these factors affect freshwater quality and quantity. As continents are becoming drier in many places due to climate change, there's increasing numbers of people that are at risk of water scarcity, droughts, and famine. As these situations increase, they lead to increased migration and social conflicts. 90% of all natural disasters are water-related. Rising severity and frequency of water-related disasters poses growing risks for social and economic stability, as well as to ecosystems, to the diversity that ecosystems support and the services that ecosystems provide. So to respond to this, UNEP has developed a freshwater strategy with a particular focus on ambient water quality, integrated management of water resources, and freshwater ecosystems. In 2017, at the third UN Environment Assembly, countries adopted a resolution to address water pollution and to protect and restore water-related ecosystems. Among other things, the resolution mandated UNEP to produce a comprehensive World Water Quality Assessment by the next Environment Assembly meeting that's planned for 2021. Between 2000 and 2015, 150 billion people gained access to basic drinking water. So that's phenomenal progress. But there's still much to be done. Women in sub-Saharan Africa spend 16 million hours per day to collect water. That's lost time for other productivity. 23 billion people still do not have access to safe sanitation. And by 2025, it's projected that 3.5 billion people will face water shortages. But we also know that from the GEO report, a healthy environment is the best foundation for economic prosperity, human health, and well-being. Freshwater ecosystems are also disappearing rapidly. There's some of the highest rates of loss of any habitat, and it comes along with the biodiversity and ecosystem services lost. Approximately 40% of the world's wetlands were lost between 1997 and 2011, and this rate is continuing. As a result, 81% of the populations of freshwater species have declined during the same time period. It's among the highest of any habitat type. Annual economic costs of wetland ecosystem loss between 1996 and 2011 has been estimated to $2.7 trillion US. An important example of this is peatlands. Peatlands store more carbon than the world's forests combined. About 15% of peatlands worldwide have been lost, along with releasing significant quantities of the carbon dioxide and methane gas that they had stored. It results in a contribution of about 5% of annual global carbon emissions. So the take-home message here is that with the loss of freshwater ecosystems, we lose the invaluable ecosystem services that they provide, things like absorbing carbon, storing carbon, or in some cases serving as natural filters to remove contaminants and pathogens from drinking water supplies. Approximately 1.4 million people die annually from diseases associated with drinking water and inadequate sanitation. Many millions more become sick. Worldwide, over 80% of all wastewater returns to the environment without being treated. Every day, 2 million tons of sewage, industrial, and agricultural waste are discharged into the world's water, and that's equivalent to the weight of the entire human population, just to give you some perspective. Nutrient loading remains one of the most prevalent forms of water pollution, with the majority of nutrient emissions coming from agriculture. But as cities are growing rapidly, especially in developing countries, it's projected to be a major source of nutrient emissions as well, as the ratios of urban to rural population continues to increase. We know there's a number of emerging contaminants as well where we have less information. And these new pollutants are often not as easily removed from current wastewater treatment technologies. These include things like pharmaceuticals, antibiotics, flame retardants, microplastics. You know the list. Meanwhile, with global population growth, per capita availability of fresh water is steadily decreasing. Over the last century, global freshwater use has increased nearly 10 times. Water use has been increasing worldwide about 1% per year since the 1980s. And this has been driven by a combination of population growth, social economic development, and changing consumption patterns. This steady rise has been principally due to a surge in demand from developing countries and emerging economies. However, the per capita water use of the majority of these countries still remains well below the rates in developed countries. For example, the highest rates of use are in New Zealand and the US, where it's more than 1,500 cubic meters. Estonia is nearly that high. Then you look at countries like Germany, Belgium, France, Hungary, Spain, the Netherlands are all within the 300 to 700 range. Now compare that to Finland, that's below 20, and more in the same range as countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, and Vietnam. And then Sweden stands out as a country that's below 10 cubic meters of annual water consumption per capita. Now we know that agriculture is by far the largest consumer of fresh water globally, accounting for about 70% of the annual water withdrawals. Industry, including power generation, accounts for another 19%, and households about 12%. Agricultural sector's water use includes, of course, irrigation of food crops, livestock, aquaculture, as well as non-food crops like biofuels. And this sector offers one of the greatest opportunities to substantially improve water use efficiency. In 2010, India was the world's largest agricultural consumer of fresh water at nearly 700 billion cubic meters per year. And India's agricultural water consumption has grown rapidly, almost doubling over the last 30 years, as population and food demands have increased. China would be the second largest user in the world, with about 385 cubic meters in 2015, although its rate of use has essentially plateaued in recent past. But of course, keep in mind that water requirements differ for different types of agricultural products, as we know. Beef and nuts are some of the most water-intensive food products. So it's important just to know that when you go to the store and you look in your shopping basket, that some of those products consume 15,000 cubic meter per ton of food produced. And you can compare that to other things like fruits and vegetables that require less than 1,000. What we eat matters, not just to your own personal health, but for the health of global water supplies. The world consumed 60 billion kilograms of beef in 2016. And meat consumption tends to increase, as we know, as citizens have more disposable income, as demonstrated by the recent increasing trends in Brazil and China over the last few decades. The highest consumption of rate of beef was been in Uruguay, Argentina, and Hong Kong, that all had over 45 kilograms per person. The 10 top countries consumed 20 pounds of beef per person, in comparison to, say, Vietnam, India, and the Congo, whereas 5 or less kilograms per person. So I've painted a rather dismal picture so far in this presentation, and now I'd like to start to focus more on some of the solutions. The UN Environment Program promotes the environmental dimension of sustainable development. We're headquartered in Nairobi, Kenya, and our mission is to provide leadership to care for the environment by inspiring, informing, and enabling nations to improve their quality of life without compromising that of future generations. We help countries decouple economic development from environmental degradation, which is absolutely essential to a sustainable future. Now, recall again the Secretary General's remarks. The scientific community is telling us that the roadmap to stay below 1.5 degrees is within reach. And also recall what I said earlier, that the recent GEO report reminds us that a healthy environment is the best foundation for economic prosperity, human health, and well-being. One thing that's clear from science is that if we have any hope of staying within 1.5 degrees, it requires preservation of our world's natural landscapes. And this is why in September at the Climate Summit, the Secretary General's Climate Action Summit, one of the major areas of attention was on nature-based solutions. A simple way to think about nature-based solutions is just any action that enhances nature's ability to provide social and economic benefits. For example, the carbon that's linked to natural coastal and marine ecosystems is often referred to as blue carbon. Blue carbon ecosystems include tidal marshes, mangrove forests, and seagrass meadows, all of which, in addition to just being naturally beautiful, they filter pollution. They provide habitat for commercially important fish species. They reduce erosion, buffer shorelines against storms and flooding. In addition, these blue forests aid in mitigation of climate change by fixing and storing atmospheric carbon. And similarly for terrestrial ecosystems, the IPCC had a special report on land use released just in August this year and estimated that 22% of all greenhouse gas emissions between 2007 and 2016 came from destructive land use, and about half of this was from deforestation. Let's talk about the Amazon. The Amazon rainforest is home to 33 million people and 10% of the world's plant and animal species. At the same time, it stores as much as 140 billion metric tons of carbon, which would otherwise just end up in the atmosphere, further contributing to climate change. Protecting these mega forests is a global imperative. Agriculture is responsible for 70% of tropical deforestation and around a quarter of the greenhouse gases that are emitted. So one of the biggest positive actions that we can take to protect against climate change and to ensure global water security is to reform our global food systems. Brazil had made great progress in reducing deforestation, but that progress ended when global commodity prices increased. We've seen clear links between deforestation and exports of things like soy and beef. It's also been a major driver of forest fires in Indonesia since the 1980s. But we can break this cycle. Governments can shift to policies for integrated land use planning at the national scale. Meanwhile, the private sector can help accelerate progress by stepping up and demanding zero deforestation supply chains. And there's a role for citizens. Creating more environmentally literate societies, the public can be more aware of the impacts of their decisions as consumers. For example, understanding the positive impact of switching to more sustainable sources of protein in your shopping basket. So the end result is that you have a more informed decisions that lead to more habitat left intact. The land supports healthy ecosystems. The ecosystems provide valuable services with benefits at a global scale that support all of us, for water security, for climate stability, and for achieving the SDGs. So I'd like to just give you a couple of examples from freshwater and coastal nature-based solutions. And one is close to my home, Lake Naivasha, which is about 90 kilometers from Nairobi. And this is a freshwater system that's used for drinking and washing and domestic use by more than 600,000 people. It's also a treasure of biodiversity, of birds, fish, mammals, including 500 hippos and a population of zebra and gazelles. In fact, it was a Ramsar site in 1995. It's also a source of water for the thriving export horticulture industry. Kenya is the third largest exporter of cut flowers in the world, and Kenya currently produces 35% of all flowers sold in the European Union. Roughly half of the country's 127 flower farms are concentrated around Lake Naivasha. And with all of the industry-related risks of pollution, including contamination from pesticides and fertilizers. So here's a lovely example, small scale, of a nature-based solution that was very important in addressing some environmental challenges. Local partners were able to advocate for the construction of adjacent wetlands to filter wastewater from the flower industry, thus preventing discharge of contaminated water directly into the lake. Now, granted, not a perfect solution, but it's an important step and a cost-effective means for protecting resources that are very, very valuable to the local community that is vulnerable to threats from a global market. Another example is from Fiji and a very climate-vulnerable community, where we were looking at implementing a small-scale project that compared traditional engineering approaches, like building a seawall, to a nature-based solution, which included rehabilitation of mangroves in order to control for flooding. The nature-based solution approach had double the cost-benefit ratio compared to traditional engineering. Installation was cheaper, maintenance was cheaper, and in the end, it was more effective. So as a result, we were able to support the town council to develop a framework to include nature-based solutions as part of their climate adaptation strategy. So now that we understand the value of nature-based solutions, the question is, what are we doing about it? Scientists and economists at the UN Environment Program estimate we could turn around land degradation by restoring 350 million hectares of degraded land by 2030. Reversing ecosystem degradation has a potential to contribute 1/3 of the carbon mitigation needed by 2030 to stay within 2 degrees Celsius. Simultaneously, you're providing these invaluable co-benefits of conserving biodiversity, maintaining healthy food, enhancing water security, all of which support attainment of global SDGs. Last March, the UN General Assembly, with 72 co-sponsors, declared 2021 to 2030 the UN Decade for Ecosystem Restoration. For every dollar invested, this could generate a return of more than 10 times the value in ecosystem services and benefits. The final point I want to make is about partnerships. It's very important in terms of delivering action. For example, with monitoring and reporting, which is an area where UNEP has worked closely with partnerships to build global time series of spatial changes of freshwater ecosystems. And I know in subsequent presentations today, you're going to hear more about some of the phenomenal work that's been done with the newly formed World Water Quality Alliance, in collaboration of the European Commission Joint Research Center, Google Earth, and the UNEP DHI Collaborating Center. This is a partnership that reduces the fragmentation of information and brings it all together for a more holistic understanding of the global status. It's collaborations like this that are key to unlocking realistic and timely solutions. And just one more example, sustainable fashion. Another great example of a powerful link of partnership with the private sector, together with consumer demand. 20 to 35% of microplastics in the marine environment are coming from synthetic clothing. The two main sources of microplastic in freshwater are from washing clothes and from tires. This is a beautiful example of how solutions can be found by applying industry innovation with efforts to allow consumers to make more impactful decisions and be more aware of the effects of their choices so that we can all live more sustainably. So in conclusion, I just want to return to my 3 key messages. Achieving the SDGs require integrated and transformational approaches. Integrated policies are needed to reduce fragmentation of governance and national planning efforts, and to incorporate the actual value of freshwater and coastal ecosystem services into economic models. The second point, our choices as individuals matter. Public awareness can have a major impact to help consumers be more informed in the decisions they make. And finally, nature is part of the solution. Preserving nature, whether that's coastal habitats that build resilience from storms, or megaforests like the Amazon that contribute massively to stabilize global climate change, nature will deliver cost-effective solutions to aid in the fight for water access and will provide invaluable benefit for biodiversity and for human well-being. Thank you.
Susan, thank you so much for that brilliant presentation. Hugely informative talks from both Susan and from Daniel, so thank you both. There's a huge amount of information to digest, so many terrifying statistics to take home, but opportunities for us all to work together. There's hope, there's lots of key messages coming out that presents a huge number of opportunities. And just one point I wanted to make, in case you're all feeling overwhelmed by the information that has been provided, we do have Marina and Jorge from the Young Water Professionals, and they're capturing all of the key messages that are coming out from the talks today. And they're going to be, Marina will be coming up to the closing, during the closing session to present some of those key messages that are coming out of today and to give us hope of what the future holds. And I'd also like to make reference to Blanca, in case you're wondering what's happening on the side of the stage. She is an artist and she's visually capturing a lot of the information that is being presented today. So that brings us to a close for our opening session. Thank you all. And I'm now going to hand over to Piers, who's going to run with the next session. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first session is around how prepared are we? We've heard brilliantly the outline of the problems, and now we need to think about, well, just how prepared are we to address them? And before we get into the actual main speakers, and we've got a water museum, which I'll explain in a moment, I'd just like to move to talk about something that happened at COP25 yesterday. If we could put the slide up that came from the students. So yesterday, over 1,000 students across Spain gathered to think about what are the challenges that we have that we need to address. They weren't directed to think about water, and you can see here that they came up with almost 15,000 ideas, and they then whittled those down to these 5 core messages. And I thought it was brilliant to share these because it shows what the next generation are thinking about. And the thing I think to take away from these is it is a much broader view than we might have assumed, and that water resonates through all of them. Look at those first 4, more wells, stricter laws prohibiting polluting goods, more desal plants, raise awareness of sea care, and even deforestation has a very strong water link to it. So it's really interesting to see that base that we're coming from. I'd also like to remind you about Slido. So as the next 2 presenters give their 15-minute talks, if you think of any questions you'd like raised, if you can put them on Slido, then after they have spoken, we will pick off the most pertinent questions and address them. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite the next 2 speakers onto the stage. It's Maria Whitmer from PBL Netherlands and SIM for Nexus, and Andreas Tolf from the European Commission for DG Climate. I'd also like to say that this particular session has been designed and created in association, in partnership with DG Climate. If we could thank them. And Maria, if you take to the stand.
Yes, thank you. Isn't it wonderful to see these messages from the kids in Madrid? I think that's why we're here for, isn't it? For a good and livable future for our children and grandchildren. And we are responsible for that future. And therefore, I'm grateful to be invited to give a presentation. I hope to give some messages that can feed a good discussion afterwards. I try my best to do this. And therefore, I'd like to start with a proposition saying, does it work? Yes, it does. Say that we're talking about climate adaptation, that adaptation will be far more efficient if you use a nexus approach, looking at water, land, energy, agriculture, food, and climate. What do I mean with a nexus approach? A nexus approach is nothing more than thinking in systems. Like the former presentation, it means taking into account several sectors, several processes. And the connection between water, land, energy, agriculture, and climate can be biophysical, but it can also be socio-economic. Yesterday I read something about new dams in the Mekong in Laos, mentioned to create more renewable energy, but it affects a fisherman's life downstream. So there are a lot of socio-economic aspects too. And therefore, governments and policymaking must take into account these systems, these relations between these sectors. Why will it be more efficient? Because if you look at policy coherence, the coherence between these different sectors and components of the system, you may be able to profit from synergy on one side. And on the other side, you may foresee, prevent and mitigate or compensate negative trade-offs and conflicts. Of course, you can never avoid conflicts in policymaking. Policymaking is making decisions with conflicting interests. But at least you can foresee them and be prepared to deal with them. Policy coherence, we find that it's about what we mean to do, the goals we want to follow, but more and more it is about how we want to reach them. So a lot of coherence issues and discussions are in the implementation phase. As was announced, I'm involved in a Horizon 2020 project called SymproNexus that is studying this system of water, land, energy, agriculture and climate. And we do that in general, enlarging the theory, but also making models and serious games as a tool to bring people and knowledge together. And we try to feed it, all this theoretical work also with knowledge and experiences from practice in 12 case studies, of which 10 are regional, national and transboundary. Symbolic, a nexus approach is taking account relations. Relations have both ways. I mean, water influencing land is different from land influencing water. And you also can see that, for example, if you put water in the center, there are a lot of indirect cascade-like effects that can cause second, third, fourth generation effects. That it's essential to do this, for example, shows a recent published evaluation of European progress towards the SDGs. It says that European soil quality is not doing very well. Sealing is increasing rapidly. And in the last week published report about the environment and the outlook of the environment, it says that future developments are doing the same, are doing worse either. We can't expect that in the future soil sealing will be solved by itself. We need to do something against it. Different is forestation. That looks a little better. Forests have been growing recently in all member states, which is good. It helps adaptation. Okay, we started from the policy analysis way to look at European policies written down in policy documents, so the policies on paper. And we found that, of course, the European Commission is very well aware about all these relations. And they're mostly well addressed in the documents. We analyzed all policy documents related to the components of the nexus and chose 33 to do a coherence analysis, which made a matrix of 33 by 33, which was a lot of work. Here you see a selection that is relevant for climate change adaptation in water. We looked if progress making into one goal supports or hinders reaching goals in other sections. And therefore we used a method developed by Nielsen for the Sustainable Development Goals. Very simple, scoring the connections from -3 to +3. -3 meaning that if you reach one goal, you can't reach the other. And +3 means that you can't reach the goal without the other. If I focus on the climate change adaptation in water and put it as a center, you can see that there are a lot of positive connections with the other goals, with renewable energy, energy security, land degradation, agriculture in the financial way. But there are also many goals that depend on how it's implemented. For example, whether preventing floods helps water quantity and quality, yes or no, or land use, or the greening of the agriculture depends on how you do it. The same counts for adaptation against droughts. Even more connection of synergies is depending on how you do it. From the other side, goals for other sectors can have a positive influence in adaptation. I'll go this a little bit faster because I see time is running fast. So it really, there are a lot of options and freedom of implementation to do well or not. If we add to this the complicated indirect second, third order connections, it's becoming a really complex system, which means that you can't see that anymore if you want to show it in this way. And therefore, the project develops models where all these connections are integrated. It's a system dynamics model. And from these models, a serious game is developed. I show you here the first interface of a pilot project, which is Greece. You can see that there are policy cards, policy interventions that can be put into time every 5 years. And the game shows how well you are doing to results indicators for the 5 components. And what makes it so very interesting is to the far right, where there's a whole dendritic system where it shows how all these interventions are connected with all the other components in the system. So we hope that this is a great tool for education and for also bringing people coming from different interests together and see what their interest does to other interests and talk about it. Well, I'll show you 2 cases. One is Southwest UK that deals with Devon and Cornwall. It's special because it's led by a private water company. that delivers drinking water and also purification of wastewater. It works together with universities and an education, a postgraduate education institute. They study sustainable agriculture, water and wastewater services, and resilience within climate change, population growth in a competitive market. I don't know what's going on, but it doesn't work properly. Okay. Can somebody help me from the technical? Because I push it, but it doesn't.
Maybe we can drive the slides from the back.
Yeah.
If we can just indicate when the slides go over. Thank you.
Yeah, can you help me? Okay. Well, there's a trilemma, as they said, between environmental sustainability, security of supply, and affordability for the customer. They also developed, it works again, a model that they will turn into a serious game, and to show how this is connected with climate change adaptation, that is part of all these three interests: environmental sustainability, security, and affordability. I just show, you don't have to read them all, but they have many interventions that are connected with climate change adaptation for flooding, for drought, and also for climate change mitigation. So the player of the game can put all these policy cards in the game and see how all the components are influenced. Another case is the one between Germany, Czech Republic and Slovakia, a transboundary case that puts landscape degradation in the center and deforestation. All these countries have a communistic history that influenced land ownership. I mean, land is given or leased to big companies, which means large-scale mechanized agriculture and degraded landscape and deforestation. It's kept in place by recent developments in European policies, the Renewable Energy Directive, for example, taken over by the national policy with subsidies for biofuels, that keeps this in place, this system, and also the capped direct payments and insufficient implementation of greening enlarge this negative influence. Landscape policy is lacking. What does this mean? That water is polluted, but what's more important here is that the whole hydrological cycle is disturbed, which causes heat and drought. It can be seen in this air picture with false colors. The blue is cool water and forests. The yellow are just harvested fallow arable land and meadows. So it's very important how the land is used, how the hydrological cycle is influenced, and that directly influences the local climate a lot, even without greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, you don't even look at that. It's directly caused. How can you solve this? By landscape restoration, greening measures in agriculture. So in energy policies, things should change. In the CAP, things should change. Landscape policy should become a bigger part of the CAP, which means that water pollution can be reduced, the hydrological cycle can be restored, and so the extremes can be buffered. It's a general nexus approach to solve these problems. It does it again. Yeah. And also research is done how you could reforest best for several purposes. For example, if you add just patches of forest, this model says that the groundwater, the aquifers, are fed best. But on the other hand, if you reforest completely, the temperature buffering will be best. So it depends on what you intend to do, how you should implement the reforestation of such an area. But reforestation is a good measure anyway. So now I come to my recommendations, and I'm running out of time, so it's good I'm here. My recommendations are that it's good to analyze where climate change adaptation meets water, land, energy, food, and climate. It can be in a region, but it can be in an actor. It can be in finances that are scarce, and it can be in capacity, but it's good to analyze that. Where do they meet? Use the synergy and try to avoid, compensate negative trade-offs. Another recommendation is to use a very good process, because a nexus process won't go well by itself. Nobody feels responsible for it, because everybody is responsible for that. And in that case, nobody will take the lead. So a nexus process should be arranged very well. And it should be based on science, on participation, and on public, I think, governmental support. Otherwise, it won't work. But at the center of all, and that's why I'm giving this speech, is a shared vision that it's important to think in systems to solve our problems. Thank you very much.
Andres, I'm going to let you take straight away.
Thank you very much. So while the PowerPoint presentation is loading, I would first of all like to thank DG Environment for letting us host together this session, the first session of this conference. This showcases the good cooperation that we have, which is, I think, essential if we want to achieve the policy goals ahead of us. So I will, in my presentation, briefly run you through what has been going on in adaptation policy by the Commission, but also by other actors in past years, and also give you a glimpse of the future. Our policies are based on science. The IPCC reports are known to everyone. I would like to also highlight the work of the European Environment Agency, in particular, who are looking at climate change vulnerabilities and risk assessments, and they are doing a regional analysis for Europe, which show, according to European macro regions, what are the challenges related to climate change. And this work is also the basis for our own adaptation work in DG Klima. I'm not going to spend too much time on presenting the impacts of climate change. I selected this particular slide because I think it shows what lies ahead of us in terms of at least precipitation, which has an influence on all hydrological cycles. While the picture speaks for itself, the period towards the end of the century is likely to be radically different, more water scarce, at least in the south. And possibly more water intense, at least on average, in the north. How do we address these challenges? Well, so far the Commission has had a double approach. We had climate mitigation policies in place, which was until now the 2030 Climate and Energy Package, because we need to address the root causes of climate change. But at the same time, in line with the Paris Agreement, we are also working on adaptation. The adaptation strategy predates the Paris Agreement, but I think the focus on adaptation is perfectly in line with the agreement. So we would like to increase the resilience of society and manage unavoidable impacts. And as we have seen also in the previous presentation, these approaches can actually be mutually reinforcing. But we have to be careful that they are not going against each other. The EU adaptation strategy, which was adopted in 2013, has three main objectives. The first one being promoting action by all member states, which covers not just the member states actually, but also looking at lower levels of governance like local authorities. We are helping these entities to adopt national and local adaptation strategies, and we also provide funding to them largely through the LIFE program, which also funds other adaptation activities. The second main objective is addressing the EU level action and trying to make it climate proof. This covers different policy areas, I will come to that later, also making infrastructure more resilient and also promoting insurance against disasters. And the third area, which I think is particularly relevant for the conference today, is better informing decision-making, identifying knowledge gaps that are facing, and actually as we progress in knowledge, we also discover more gaps. As we fill in these knowledge gaps, the results have to be disseminated, and that's also a separate action in the adaptation strategy. I will now show a number of particular actions in more detail because I think they are quite relevant for water policy. Our activities in promoting national adaptation strategies in the member states have been, I think, rather successful because in 2013 there were only 15 member states with a national adaptation strategy or plan, and today we are up to 26 with 2 member states having already draft adaptation plans in the pipeline but only waiting for adoption. And in these we have made an analysis of these adaptation strategies, which were partly built on guidance that the Commission produced in 2013. And actually the sectors that are relevant for water, such as agriculture and forestry, or health, or the water resources and management themselves, come as in the 4 top key vulnerable sectors that were identified in these strategies. The LIFE funding, the LIFE instrument in the period 2014-2020 has been instrumental in supporting demonstration action on climate mitigation and adaptation to the same extent. Just as an example, the last call, which had a deadline of the 12th of September, there were 24 million euros earmarked for adaptation, and among the LIFE projects, the traditional ones, as opposed to integrated, more complex LIFE projects, there are a number of areas that are relevant for water policy. The key one being the sustainable management of water in drought-prone areas, floods and coastal management, but also resilience of agriculture is important. Jumping to the knowledge gap part, in the current research framework program, the Horizon 2020, the most frequently addressed issues are all water related. So water itself 27, projects, nature 25, agriculture 24. This comes from the evaluation of the adaptation strategy. So in the meantime, there actually may be more projects that have been launched. The one partner who I also need to mention apart from the European Environment Agency is the Joint Research Center, who helps us in modeling the possible economic impacts of climate change with their so-called PASETA studies. They have produced already 3 series of reports, thematic reports in this field, including on droughts, water scarcity, and floods. And they are now working on finalizing the last of these, the 4th installment of these reports, which are trying to put a price tag as much as it is possible on inaction in particular sectors and looking at what that would do to that sector under different future climate scenarios. The Climate Adapt portal, which is maintained by the European Environment Agency, is the dissemination tool. It has a wealth of information, both sectoral and geographically organized. You have here an example, a print screen basically of the water management section, and on the right-hand side of the screen that was captured, you can see a list of different sources and the numbers of sources that are available in there. So if you haven't yet visited this website, I invite you to take a look. Now I come to the most exciting part, at least as far as I'm concerned, is the mainstreaming adaptation across other policy areas. This involves working with other Commission services on making sure that in their policy areas they are taking due account of the future impacts of climate change. I highlighted here areas which are of obvious interest to water policy, starting with water policies themselves, the Water Framework Directive, the Floods Directive, the proposal for water reuse, which has an obvious climate adaptation advantage. Maybe because the fitness check of the Water Framework Directive has just been completed, I could highlight some climate change relevant findings in there, such as one area that needs to be reinforced is the member states' actions in terms of climate adaptation in their river basin management plans, because there is a range of climate adaptation measures that have been proposed in guidance documents, and only a small percentage of the member states are using all of them, and the rate of uptake of these measures could be greatly increased. But the same way we are working together with DG Agriculture, DG Environment on forestry and biodiversity, and we are also focusing on other areas such as horizontal areas such as, like making cities adapting to climate change through the Covenant of Mayors, which also has some water-related components, and obviously the increasing the resilience of infrastructure to climate change includes resilience to floods in general, but also in particular in the energy sector, making sure that water scarcity will not impact energy production in the future. Mainstreaming is also about funding, and as an example, you can see that in the European Structural and Investment Funds in the period 2014-2020, the climate-related allocations were 25%, and out of this, what could be adaptation-related is actually 14% if you adopt the adaptation and combined mitigation and adaptation actions. I come now to the main findings of the evaluation that we carried out of our adaptation strategy in it was published in December 2018, so already a year ago. It was found that while the national adaptation strategies meant that there is significant progress in terms of planning in the member states, the same could not be said of implementation and monitoring of these actions, which is, I mean, it's nice to have strategies in place, but putting them to work is another matter, and there some member states were lagging behind. We identified also newly emerging knowledge gaps that need to be bridged, and for which the adaptation strategy is not necessarily equipped. There was also a problem in terms of not being distinctive enough in terms of territorial and social differences in vulnerability to climate change. Other new developments which are external to the strategy have been the more extreme events that we have been observing. Also the damage estimates are increasing about the future climate impacts. And obviously the adoption of the Paris Agreement and the recognition of the adaptation-related provisions is something that would need to be included in the strategy. Now, we did not wait until the European Green Deal proposal yesterday to take relevant action to follow up to these recommendations. We have worked together with the member states to make sure that the national energy and climate plans, which are due to be finalized by the end of this year, also integrate adaptation. there is an obligation to mention adaptation goals in their decarbonization chapter, but we also try to push the member states to consider future climate risks when they discuss the energy security dimension, so as to make sure that the security of supply is not negatively affected. In the proposal for the next multi-annual financial framework, there is an increase, a clear increase in the funding proposed for climate change. It is as yet unclear what will be the distribution between mitigation and adaptation. For instance, Horizon Europe has now 35% of the funding that should be dedicated to climate change. We are also proposing that, that this is just a proposal by the Commission. We will have to see whether it goes through the Member States and Parliament, but we would like that any cohesion funding on disaster risk management is actually done on the basis of disaster risk management plans that are consistent with national adaptation strategies and NECPs. The action plan on financing sustainable growth will mobilize private finance towards climate and sustainability objectives. And here I would refer to the huge piece of work that is carried out under the so-called taxonomy of green investments, whereby adaptation is one of the criteria according to which an investment will be judged clean or not. Importantly, the Horizon Europe will have missions, which are particular types of, I would say, conglomerates of stakeholders and actors on the ground who are striving to achieve something like a moon landing type of mission. So it's a visionary type of research. And we have a mission area on adaptation under which we are now looking at specific missions that in the area also of adaptation. So watch this space. There will be proposals coming up which are co-created. And I need to finish off by mentioning the European Green Deal, which was, well, we had an extensive presentation about that at the beginning, but there is actually a paragraph on the revision, the much needed revision of the European adaptation strategy, which we promise now to adopt by 2020, 2021. The exact timing, I think, will be probably end of the next year or early 2021. And here, well, the objectives that are announced in the Green Deal are to strengthen the efforts on climate proofing, resilience building, prevention and preparedness. We also want to influence public and private investments, but keeping in mind the need to act on nature-based solutions. And quite importantly, we need to make sure that across the EU, the investors, insurers, businesses, cities and citizens are able to access data that is relevant for assessing climate risks, and that they can, and we need to also develop the instruments to integrate climate change into risk management practices, in particular of insurers or investors. So with this, I have come to the end of my presentation. I hope that the next period, the next year, will be an exciting period for adaptation policy. We will be drafting, and input from all stakeholders will be very welcome in this process. Thank you very much.
Well, we've got a few minutes for questions, so if you've got anything burning that you'd like to raise, please put it on Slido. I think my takeaway from that, if we could just have the lights on our speakers, if possible. I think my takeaway, Maria, from yours was it's complicated. The system is very complicated, and we've all got to work together to address that. And I thought that led very nicely to your mainstreaming, in that taking the adaptation policies and making sure that they're embedded across all of the activities. I thought this was an interesting compliment. I'd like to start with you, Maria. So you painted a picture of great complexity. Do you think we understand the complexity enough, or is there another layer beyond that which is going to flummox us at the next turn?
Is this okay? Does it work like this?
Yep,
okay.
that works.
I think there are several layers. As I said, it's about biophysical, socioeconomic, governance, connections. And I think the best way we can learn is learning bottom-up from practice. So trying to gather all experiences in conflicts that were unforeseen, for example, from bottom-up. And somehow it would be good to have a database for that, so that everybody can learn from each other. Maybe ADAPT could be for that.
The deeper we go, the more complicated it's going to become.
Yes, it will be, because
but the better we'll understand it.
Everything comes together by, at one actor or in one region or in one fund that doesn't have enough money or something, for example. So yes, we should learn from practice.
Thank you. Andres, I've got a question for you. Do you think Europe is leading the world in terms of our adaptation strategy, or what could we learn from others? I get a sense that everybody looks to Europe to see what we do first, even North America. Does that resonate with you?
I think it's working. Yeah.
Yes.
So I think that it's not possible to give an answer like yes or no. I think that on particular areas of adaptation, particular regions of Europe are doing very well, and there is a lot of knowledge that has been accumulated, and maybe we could speak about world leadership. I'm thinking of the Netherlands, for example, when it comes to sea level rise, obviously. But on other areas, I think that there's a surprising amount that we can learn from even developing countries, because they have had their agriculture affected by droughts and climate change impacts much more heavily than we have, and have developed resilient.
Yeah, they don't have the luxury of the buffer that we've had. They're right in the middle of the battle zone, aren't they?
Sorry?
They're right in the middle of the battle zone. They're dealing with it.
Yes. That's right. So I was attending conferences recently where researchers were advocating going to, for instance, North Saharan countries, to Algeria, to look at how they manage horticulture in oasis-type environments, and take home messages from there to prepare for future climate in Central Europe.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Right, we've got a question from Slido, from the audience here. Maria, how can we standardize the metrics in Nexus to support water regulation?
I hear a double, because could you repeat?
How can we standardize the metrics in our Nexus approach to support water regulation better?
You mean the metrics for the policy coherence?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Well, standardize, I think as water policy may change, the metrics will change. It's important that the most influential goals of the different components are in the metrics. And standardization is the method that one by one you look at all the connections, the direct connections in one direction and in the other direction, and that you do this in a way that you especially look at the different contexts that these goals could be reached. And for that, you need experts. So I think the standardization is more in the method, how you do it, than in the metrics itself. It should be flexible in metrics and follow.
It's in the methodology. Yeah, it's in the methodology as much as anything else. Okay, I've suddenly had a whole sweep of questions delve in, so we'll try and go for some short, sharp answers. Andres, is the EU considering to regulate food transportation in order to reduce emissions? Are we considering regulating food transportation? You did briefly mention around tax. No, that was in an earlier presentation. There was a taxes, boundary taxes.
So in particular, food transportation.
Food, yes.
I think that there is no particular plan to target at this point food transportation, as far as I know. But I think in the coming period, in the implementation of the European Green Deal, there is a lot of detail that needs to still be worked out. And if this is an area which is considered particularly like a low-hanging fruit, I think it would maybe make sense to have something in place. But it's for the future discussions.
Good. All right. I think we've got time for one more, and it's back with you, Andres. An excellent question here. Will there be any binding elements in the next adaptation strategy? I think the key word there is binding. And they've given some examples, just so that you can consider them, i.e. the restoration of freshwater ecosystems, the NBS plan, or actions against water abstraction. How many teeth is it going to have?
Well, we are certainly not going to have a climate adaptation law as such. We have set out to do is a climate adaptation strategy, but the strategy could well announce action in particular sectoral areas, which could lead to some kind of EU legislation. This is about what mainstreaming is about. It's to make sure also that EU legislation itself is prepared for future climate impacts. So I do not exclude that we might come forward with such ideas, but first we need to discuss internally within the Commission with other services to see which are the pieces of legislation which could be up for this, which are up for review, for example. And then we will make proposals that will be subject to a broad discussion and input.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, we've run out of time. Could I ask that you thank our speakers in the usual way? If you take your seats. Now I'm going to move center stage because while I'm talking, I believe there's going to be some activity happening behind me. So we've got about half an hour before we break for lunch. And for this little session before lunch, I'd like you to come on a journey with me. We're going to go into the future. I want you to imagine that we are 20, 30 years in the future, and that our next three speakers have all been invited forward to put something into a museum of water. So we're in the future, and we're looking backwards, and they are putting something into the museum of water which will celebrate how we have addressed some of the challenges that face us today, but we'll have resolved them in 20 years' time, 20, 30 years' time. So if I could ask my three next speakers to come up to the stage. We have Javier Santa Cruz from Contadores de Agua de Zaragoza, Adriano Battellini from the Irrigants de Europe, and we have Michael Murray. Excellent. I was looking over there for you. I was slightly worried. If you could take your spaces here. Yes, if you start there. You're in the middle. What I'm going to do is I'm going to interview each of them, and we're going to find out what is their exhibit under here. I think there might be a video camera that might capture it, so we need to just make sure that the line of sight with the video camera will be there. But first of all, let's find out a little bit more about you. So tell me, who are you? Where do you work? What is it you do?
My name is Javier Santa Cruz. I work for Contasara as a Chief Technical Officer. And Contasara is a Spanish company, part of a multinational company called Arad Group. And we are smart meter manufacturers.
Smart meter manufacturer. So I'm assuming that something under here is to do with smart meters.
Yeah,
but before we get to smart meters, let's start with the world that we've been in today. How is water currently, just for people in the audience who may not be familiar with water metering, can you just take 30 seconds to just outline how water metering happens today?
Well, everybody in our house, we have a water meter. And the water meter is the only instrument to bill the water consumption to the users. And usually the accuracy of the water meters is an issue which is solved, but how often the utility get the information from metering is today a limitation, which is directly related to the frequency of billing.
So we've got an issue around accuracy, and we've got an issue around frequency. And just help me, surely the only point of a water meter is to help the utility charge as much money as possible. Does it have any value other than that?
Yes, today, in most cases, utility just bill the consumption, which is an efficient way to reduce the consumption, of course. But usually utilities are a strange kind of companies which recommend not to
Keep in mind we have quite a few utilities there. Describing them as strange might mean that you don't get out alive.
Well,
but they are strange types of... Sorry, I cut into you. I do apologize.
Yeah.
You were saying that utilities are strange
yes,
organizations.
it's strange because they recommend not to consume so much the product that they sell. But, well, the limitation is that if you only read every 3 months, the only thing that you can do is to bill, and you cannot help properly to the final customer to reduce water consumption. And if they have, for example, they have a leak or an unwanted water consumption, for example, a toilet with a leak or a tap that drops, you will finally detect that happens when the bill arrives with a very high amount of money.
Okay, so we have, let me just clarify so that we're all on the same page. So we're saying we have meters at the moment that are not particularly accurate and that give readings infrequently that don't enable anyone to manage effectively their day-to-day usage to reduce it down. Is that correct?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. But I'm aware of things like AMI and AMR. Tell me about those. What's the strengths and weaknesses of what is AMI and AMR, and what are their strengths and weaknesses?
First evolution, AMR is for automated meter reading. It's just a way to increase the efficiency of taking the readings by using radio short-range systems for taking the reading. But even if you read the meter visually, or even if you use AMR, you need to send some person to read the meter. This is the main reason why meters are not read very frequently, because you have the cost of taking the reading is directly related to the amount of times per month or per quarter that you go there.
I got it.
So this is why AMI concept is introduced. AMI means Advanced Measuring Infrastructure. So the idea is to create a kind of network in order to allow the meters to send the information to that network without the needing of sending a person.
All right, so let me just recap, just so we take everybody on the journey. So we have meters that can read infrequently. We now have a system with meters that can read more frequently, and they send their data, and it gets connected via the Internet of Things and sends a regular reading. But even those aren't perfect, are they? We're almost getting to the reveal now. Almost AMI is also not perfect because...
Well, in order to make an AMI system, you need a very good technology. Not every technology is valid for AMI. You need a technology, a wireless technology, a technology with a low battery consumption, because energy is very important for water meters. Cost has to be reasonable, and the technology has to be capable of reaching long distances.
Excellent. So let's see what we've got under here. So, and for those of you in the audience who can't see it immediately, if we put it to the side. So now, tell me what this is, and we've got the camera over there if you want to direct it towards the camera. So what have we got?
Well, this is, actually this is a water meter. But to say that this is a water meter is just to compare a typewriter with a computer. In fact, if we define a device...
And just to be clear, this is the computer, not the typewriter.
Yes, that's it. This
okay,
is
I just don't want to make that.
Thank you. It's important to note. Anyway, if you define a device because of the capabilities of what the device can do, this is more than a water meter. It's a tool for controlling water consumption and also for increasing the efficiency of the water networks.
All right, but tell me what's special about this. What's innovative about this particular meter?
This particular meter has mainly two innovations. First is that the meter is intelligent. That means that the meter can take the readings internally and store inside and keep them until the time you can send to the utility. And the second one is that it has internally the technology to transmit the information to a mobile network with all the capabilities that make an AMI feasible.
Brilliant. So what I loved about this is we've known about smart water meters for years. And the problem has always been gathering the data and making the batteries not die. And if I've understood correctly, this meter gathers the data, stores it, and then blurps it out once a day, but it sends not just one reading, sends the whole day's readings in one go. Is that correct?
Yeah, the meter can send information about readings every hour. So typically, because of management needs, information is sent once per day, but you have the possibility to have access to the hourly readings. So that makes possible to detect, for example, if a user is consuming water during the night, or for example, if the consumer has a leak, we can find that the water is being consumed during a long set of hours.
Because in the old days, they'd have just had one reading for maybe 1 day or 1 month, but now they'll get 24 readings over the day. They can see how much water is being used at 3 in the morning and be able to spot that they've got a leak already. So it's that level of granularity which will drive down water usage.
Yeah, even I think technology could support even to go beyond that until 15 minutes, for example, without saving battery life. But I think it's most important to consider a kind of proactive intelligence inside the meter. So as you have electronics, the meter can detect abnormal flow rate profiles. So the water meter can just detect leaks, detect alarms, detect not correct profile consumption profile. So it can decide to communicate even without waiting to the daily transmission.
It can spot the anomaly. It's got artificial intelligence enough to be able to spot an anomaly and tell people about it.
And this is the way that opens the possibility to send this information even to the final user.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. So our first exhibit is on the water side, and it's about smart meters, artificial intelligence, data management. It's about a step change in how we deliver information to water users so that they can change their practices and processes and behaviors such that we protect the environment better. Correct?
Okay, correct. Thank you.
Can we give a round of applause, please? Adriana, good to meet you. You're for our second exhibitor. Tell me a bit about yourself, who you are, where you work.
Okay, my name is Adriano Battilani. I'm the General Secretary of Irrigando Europe. Irrigando Europe is an association that is as member as all the irrigation association of the area most endangered for climate change in South Europe, and we are representing almost 75% of the irrigated land all over Europe.
You must have some of the most stressed members. I loved the comment earlier from the water stress minister who said, my job is so stressful. And your members are working in an environment where they are under constant stress, and it is just increasing year upon year.
Well, let's say the climate change is putting pressure on the sector, and we have to pay also some, let's say, we are agriculture, and listening all the presentation, when you talk about agriculture, it seems that agriculture is always guilty of something. And there is always an approach that is confusing the agriculture and the irrigated agriculture. Irrigated agriculture is a sector that is one of the most advanced all over Europe. We are quite an advanced and innovative industry, already undertaking the transition phase toward the digital agriculture, agriculture 4.0. So we are managing the water as better we can in order to keep alive not only the river but also the river plain. Our dream is to have a green river, a blue river, and a green area around with a viable and rich agriculture.
So let me just paraphrase that back. You're saying that your members are on the front line of climate change. Your members are adapting to it because they have to. There's no choice. There is nowhere they can go. And actually what that's driven is that it's driven innovation, it's driven an open mind, it's driven a need to change how they behave. Correct?
Yes, that's what we want. We want to survive and adapt in this new environment that is created by the climate change.
So that's today. Now let's jump forward 20 years, and you're putting your exhibit. I think we can reveal your exhibit now, because your exhibit will raise eyebrows. Tell me what this is.
This is a metronome. A metronome is a simple instrument that has been used for centuries to synchronize, to give the pace, give the rhythm. All the contribution, all the discussion we got today are about put together, to synchronize action, to make possible that all the sector have positive interaction, to make effective the final and the total impact, not the impact sector by sector. That's exactly what we want. We are part of a complexity and we want to be part of the management of this complexity. So the future can be green and blue only if we are able to synchronize the sector, not to focus only on one.
And help me with what it is you want to synchronize. What are the pieces of the puzzle that you think need to come together better than they are today?
For instance, most of the action undertook in the last period were intended to reduce the water uses or to limited access to water. That in some cases is also correct when we talk about excessive use, overuse, or wrong use of water. But we have tools or combination of tools that we are applying every day nowadays, and we want to apply even more in the next future that will allow us to give to the plant only what the plant needs for its survival and to produce for the human being. We are close to use only the water that is needed for the transpiration of the plant. So below this threshold means no agriculture. The impact of the action, not synchronized action till now, can be summarized in a very sad and simple figure. We are losing one small farm holder per day just in the area around Valencia.
One small
farm holder per day.
Wow.
Yes. This is the people, this is the soldier that are in the front line. If we lose these people, we cannot stop desertification.
And so, next year, what do you want to change next year so that in 20 years' time we look back and are able to say we addressed it? What's the action that you want to see?
Well, there is already many action ongoing, and the integration of the common agricultural policy with the climate policy and the Water Framework Directive are good opportunities, but must be taken opportunities in order to make more resource available. We are really in favor of the water use. We are really in favor of whatever action that is letting flowing water in the system and not stopping the blood circulation.
Excellent. All right, so I think what I'm hearing is that what you're putting in the museum is a metronome, but the metronome is a symbol. It's a symbol for the unstoppable nature of what we've got to do. It's a symbol of how we must synchronize our activities. It's a symbol of how we must bring legislation and industry together so that they are working in harmony rather than bumping at odds. And hopefully with things like the recently announced Green Deal, that will be a step in the right direction.
We are confident of that, and we are really happy to see the 6 action points because we are convinced that we can fit in most of it.
And when we arranged this, we didn't know they were going to be coming out. Isn't that marvelous? Thank you very much. Can we give a round of applause, please? Michael, good to meet you. So we've had clean water, we've had a bit of policy, sorry. Where are we going now? Tell me a little bit about you, who you work for, what you do.
My name is Michael Murray. I'm CEO of a company called NVP Energy Limited, and I suppose our vision is to take wastewater treatment, convert it into an energy source in a carbon neutral and energy positive manner.
Excellent. But tell me about you first. What's your background? What have you done previously?
So my background, Piers, would be I'm fortunate that I've maybe look younger or older than I am, but I spent the last 20 years in senior enough management positions in corporate organizations, in medium-sized enterprises and small companies as I am now. So that experience probably has brought to bear an ability to scale companies, make the turn, let's say, innovation into something real, and turn it into something commercial that is viable and bring people along on that journey.
Right. And what I wanted to stress there was that Michael is one of the world's best entrepreneurs in the water and wastewater sector. And I know that you're going to talk about wastewater, but very like Javier did with water meters, just setting the tone as to what's happening today. Can you just give me an overview of how do people generally treat wastewater today?
I'll try and do that in
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Well, there's two problems. You've got the regulated municipal plants, which is in every country in the world, and then you've got industry players that are feeding those plants or addressing their wastewater at source, like food and drinks plants. So, unfortunately, the industry and the municipal wastewater industry hasn't changed a lot. Innovation has been lacking. So, how they treat that wastewater is using a 100-year-old technology or process that was developed in where you're from, the UK, and that has been deployed globally in hot climates, cold climates, and it's centered on a very energy-intensive process called aeration-activated sludge processes.
Okay. And for people who are not familiar with what activated sludge is, just briefly, what does it involve?
Very simply, if you can imagine Olympic-sized swimming pools, maybe 5, 10 of them for a large size, let's say like Zaragoza, where you're pounding energy using pumps. I might just stand up actually. Using pumps. So basically, this quantifies that if you take Spain or you take any of a regulated country, it accounts to 4 to 5% of the energy costs of the national grid electricity energy. So very energy intensive and unfortunately lacking in innovation.
Right. Just to be clear, that wasn't 45, that was 4 to 5.
4 to 5, 5%.
4 to 5% of the electrical energy of a developed country is used to blow air into a wastewater treatment process. Is that what you're saying?
That is the case, and in fact in the US it's higher than that, in the USA.
Okay.
So some are more efficient than others, certain countries.
So that feels like an opportunity that we can address. So I know we're getting near to revealing, but not just yet. Tell me, what's the alternative to aerobic treatment?
The alternative to aerobic treatment, there's many ways to do it, but unfortunately what has happened is that aerobic is still the default position for the large municipalities for countries because of the risk-reward nature and the regulated nature of it. So the alternative, and we'll touch on it, is a passive system, I believe. I think if you take what the very good speakers earlier on spoke about, we have UN Sustainability Goals 6, clean water, 13, climate action and energy reduction. At a European level, we have big drivers in terms of the European Union Directive, again linked to climate and energy action. And then only as recent as yesterday, we're hearing the President speaking about the Green Deal. So I believe when we talk about what is currently there isn't an awful lot that is different to what's gone on the last 50 years, but I think the stick is now coming out, which I think is needed, and that's going to drive innovation truly into this space. So maybe that leads me to what we think might
Tell me what you think is the next solution then.
I think the next solution, I think we're here today, I was very motivated by the speakers earlier, is we have to change what we do. And if we take that 5% example of how municipal wastewater is currently being the solution, go-to solution, and trying to reduce that by 1% or 2%, what we have to develop is energy neutral, carbon neutral, energy positive wastewater and water treatment plants. So that's a step change. And I'd like to think in the 30 years, as we were talking 2050, and the fact that that Green Deal will have been achieved and Europe will be a carbon neutral continent, the first one, well, hopefully our solution will have gone some way to help and assist.
So tell me what your solution is.
Our solution is based on a biological process, and maybe the slide, if that slide can come up for the benefits of the audience. So I touched on the bottom left what the traditional way is. So we actually have, what I've done and what the team has done in NVP Energy is, it's not a short road to success, but this is 15 years in the making with different collaborators involved. So this is centered on a biological process which is centered on specialized microbes that can work at low temperature, that is ambient temperature, so outside temperature. So what you're seeing here is really a first of a kind in a European context and global context, where we will take the wastewater that's generated either at a food and drinks plant or an industrial plant or municipal plant, and we can break down the organic matter. These are the nasties that's in that wastewater. And as a byproduct, we generate a high quality gas, biogas, that can then be used to run the plant, making it carbon neutral or energy positive.
And comparing that to the blowing air into tanks, you don't blow any air into this at all?
No, we've intentionally designed it from the outside in. It's based on a forward feed recycle pumping regime. So if you were to compare that to a traditional aerobic activated sludge plant, it would be 1/10 just of the running costs. But then you have to quantify that existing activated sludge plant is generating no energy. It's actually sucking energy. We're actually, as a byproduct, generating a gas, which I don't think, this wasn't planned, we won't open it, but very simply, this is housed.
When this was backstage, someone said, "My God, that smells horrible." Because it is straight from a wastewater treatment works.
Well, in fact, it's from this plant on the top left. This is a deployment we've had in the UK. Again, a first of its kind. It's with Welsh Water, a large UK utility, where we've deployed our solution at a commercial level, treating primary effluent post-screen and post-primary, as per the diagram, hopefully where you see the red hatched line. So in real time, that has been a challenge, but a very exciting project. We are treating very low strength, very dilute wastewater temperatures, and in fact, I checked yesterday, we're talking about temperatures in the order of 9–10 degrees Celsius, and still achieving a high level of removal performance, with terminology being BOD, COD.
And just tell me, what is actually in this? What's this at the bottom here? What's the unique step? Can I?
Yes.
Am I going to smell horrible for the rest of the day if I get some of that on my hands?
Possibly, but that's not the worst thing that could happen, it appears. So how it works is very simple. This is based on a patent-approved technology that was developed at a university in the west of Ireland. There was 10 years of R&D completed on what's called psychophilic
which means low temperature. Psychophilic means low temperature.
Psychophilic is defined as less than 20 degrees Celsius of the temperature of the water that you're treating. Okay. So the anaerobic digestion has been around since Noah's Ark, frankly, but there's been very little in terms of adaptation. So anaerobic digestion, for the audience that may or may not know, it's based on a temperature of above 35 degrees, 37 degrees Celsius.
And you're holding your stomach, because that's what's going on inside our stomachs every day, as we're anaerobically digesting our food.
Yes, and like a cow's stomach, it's the same type of thing. It's a glorified anaerobic digester. So the bugs that work to break down your organic matter within oneself has to work at a temperature. What the university developed, which was groundbreaking, was their ability to take the wastewater and do it at lower temperatures, still achieving an equivalent removal performance. So that was the genius nut. It wasn't me that came up with it. But what I've done and worked very closely with the team is take it from what was in the university at a lab scale 7 years ago, and we've now scaled that by 100x, 100 times scale up. So from lab to sites where not alone are we deploying this with Welsh Water and a municipality, which maybe as the audience might know, has its challenges getting tech onto these plants, but we've also deployed the solution on large food and drinks industrial plants, from breweries with Heineken to dairies, milk processors. So the application is quite large.
Industrial as well as municipal. Industrial as well as municipal.
Absolutely. And the patented aspects of this are, there's 3 or 4 fold to it. One is the the biology and the bugs, the specialized bugs that have been developed and inoculated. But then it's housed in a system, as you can see, it's a tank but a reactor, and part of our patent is retaining the bugs in the process. So there's 2 or 3, let's say, regimes going on within the tank. You're forward feeding. So in a way what we're doing is, these bugs are settled, so these are the bugs. So if you can imagine you were pumping and you're agitating.
And here's where the lid comes off.
Yes, and that basically this is an ongoing process where you're continuously taking the water, treating it. At the top of the tank then, and this is more complicated than this, believe me, there are moving parts to it. The biogas rises, and you will, hopefully you haven't.
He's going to drink it. No, I'm going to drink it.
You can smell. Yeah, you can smell.
Oh, yes, I can definitely smell that.
Methane. And what you're seeing here is a natural process using and housing an anaerobic digestion technology that is passive, and bringing it all together under a patent, and with the intended aim that we're going to deploy this, and hopefully 30 years from now we'll see this in many municipal
Excellent. Thank you very much, Michael. Can we have a round of applause, please? So, I encourage you over lunch to talk about what might you put into the Museum of Water of the future. Is it the water meter that will change how domestic and industrial people can use and monitor their water more effectively? A water meter that is low cost, accurate, long-lasting, and provides that granularity of how your water is being used? Or will it be something that is policy-driven, that actually recognizes that actually the key thing that needs to go in the Museum of the Future is the fact that we recognize right here, right now, that we need to change. And it's not just talk, it's actually about aligning and synchronizing the things that we do together. Or will it be over here on the wastewater side, and that smell is following me? I don't know, are you smelling it? It's following. Will it be on the wastewater side? Well, we've got to move away from what we've done for the last 100 years, which is basically blowing air into wastewater to clean it up. We need to move to anaerobic systems because they're much more sensible, but they've always been difficult to run because you've always got to have them at high temperatures. You've always got to be at sort of body temperature. And here we have a technology which is low temperature. It's low temperature and low strength. And that combination of technology and bugs and pulling them together may provide the step change that's required to enable us to radically change wastewater treatment for the next 100 years. With that, could we just give our 3 exhibitors a final round of applause? I'd like to thank you all for your attention this morning. I'd like to thank all of the speakers who've been here this morning. Lunch is being served outside. I think you've actually got to cross the hall, but people will direct you towards us. And if you could be back here in an hour's time, that would be marvelous. One last round of applause for everybody who spoke this morning. Brilliant. Well done.